Thanks, John. And as John said, we really try to focus as an organization on coaching development. We also put a lot of energy into starting new programs and shoring up our programs. I'm happy to say that 2 weeks ago we added our 131st new college wrestling program since 2009. Admittedly, most of them are in Division II, Division III, NAIA, junior college. I'm thrilled to say we now have 26 intercollegiate women's teams out there. But we also have some movement in Division I. Recently, probably most people have heard Fresno State's bringing their program back, and we're working on a couple of one of the byproducts of this Wrestlers in Business network really taking hold in every city across the country is that we need a mechanism for business leaders to be mentoring our college coaches, our high school coaches, our middle school coaches to become more entrepreneurial and CEO-like. Institutional funding is going to continue to get harder and harder to get regardless of what level they're at. And there's no better community to help us with this than the business community. And the Wrestlers in Business is going to play a critical role, an essential role in bringing the business leaders together with our coaches to make sure that our programs have everything that they need. Admittedly, we have some significant challenges in Division I, and there's no one that can state them more eloquently than our speaker. And it's really an honor and a privilege to introduce him. He really needs no introduction, but he's widely considered one of the most premier athletic administrators in America. He wrestled at Minnesota State at Moorhead. He was the athletic director at Northern Iowa, University of Iowa, and Stanford. And he's currently, I don't know if he's currently, maybe he's completing his term as a board member of the United States Olympic Committee. And he currently serves as the commissioner of the Big 12 Conference. And he's one of the greatest ambassadors we could ever want for the sport of wrestling within the toppest, the highest levels of the NCAA. And he's so unbelievably passionate about our sport. He's never said no. I keep telling him, I promise I won't ask for another favor for one more day, and I think I've been saying that for maybe the last 15 years. But ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Commissioner Bob Bowlsby.
Thank you for the nice turnout. I can only assume that there's a large number of you that I still owe money to. I just turned 63, and I know for some of you that sounds young. Others, you'll be amazed how quickly you get there. But I have to tell you, I still consider myself a wrestler, and that's a good thing. I have had the benefit of some terrific coaches and mentors over the years, and one of them is here today. Don Huff was my assistant coach at a really good program in Waterloo, Iowa, West High School. So, Coach, thanks for being here. I think Don probably made you come, but it's good to see you, and thanks for being here, and appreciate all you've done. I think all of us probably have special people in our lives like that are tied to wrestling, and that makes it all the harder for us because it's so foundational for us to think about the diminishment of our sport. But as Mike and others have said, we've got a lot of challenges on our hands, and the fact is we aren't gonna deal with them unless we deal with them. And I have to tell you, I was really honored to be invited to speak at the Wrestlers in Business Network event. But until I got the invitation, now I work in the business. I was chair of the wrestling committee. I was a wrestler all through junior high, high school, and college, and a little while after that. I've worked at 3 great universities that all have wrestling, and I've never heard of the Wrestlers in Business Network. Now, that's a good thing and a bad thing. What it means is there's lots of growth available. But it also is emblematic of what we don't do sometimes in our sport. Folks, I got to tell you, I mean, how many of you are familiar with the term shooting your foot off? Yeah? Done it or familiar with it? Well, folks, we're shooting our foot off by having our national championship on the opening weekend of the NCAA basketball tournament. We're getting unprecedented coverage on ESPN, but we are shooting our foot clean off by having this tournament this weekend. Why do we have it this weekend? Anybody know? It's always been this weekend. And that's the best answer anybody's going to be able to give. Now, we all love the traditions of our sport. There isn't any question about that. But now is a time when we need to take a fresh look at everything we're doing. I would challenge all of us to participate in one way or another in putting some sort of a task force together. It needs to include coaches, it needs to include administrators, and it needs to include many of you in the room who have run businesses and had successful careers and know what it is to have to make difficult decisions. Because wrestling has been under siege, and thank God for Mike Moyer. We all ought to keep him in our prayers, because I don't think there's any single guy that has done more for wrestling in recent years than Mike Moyers, and that deserves a round of applause. It's, I think there are, we spend a lot of time talking about ways to save our sport instead of ways to grow it. And there are lots of ways. I mean, you get in a survival mode. There isn't any doubt about it. We've all seen lots of programs go away. As Aaron mentioned, you feel like you got your horse shot out from under you when the program that you competed in is no longer there for you to go back to. And in some ways, you can't unring that bell. But we really need to stop shooting our foot off. We need to put together a group that takes a holistic look at when we have the national championship, how we manage the national duels, what the season looks like. It's a terrific opportunity, and I know some of you will immediately reject this idea out of hand, but wrestling should be the first sport to say, we're going to be a one-semester sport. We're going to emphasize academics in the fall, and we're going to compete for championships in the spring. And is it a big change? Yeah, sure, it's a big change. But I've been at this business 35 years. And in that 35 years, the best piece of omnibus legislation to come through the NCAA in that entire time dealt with the sport of baseball. And they got all the right people at the table, and they dealt with the start of the season, the end of the season, how they compete, how long the College World Series is, what kind of minimum. They had a big transfer problem, and so they went through the process of determining you had to have a minimum scholarship in place. Speaking of scholarships, you want to immediately improve the sport of wrestling? Lower the scholarship limit. Football's gone from unlimited to 120 to 105 to 95 to 85, and you can say what you want about the BCS or the new playoff. The reason college football is the game it is today is because the parity on the field is extraordinary. The more you can improve the parity, I'm really happy to see so many more teams close to the flame in wrestling. There are some teams that previously haven't been there. Some that have been there are falling back just a little bit. But the more teams we can keep close to the flame, the stronger the sport is going to be. And it's that sort of omnibus approach that the baseball people took. That's what we need to do. We need to do it with leaders like the people up here and those of you out in the room that have the experience to do it. I know many of you have been generous with your dollars, but you also need to be generous with your leadership abilities, because our sport needs it. And I've told Mike this over several times during our conversations. We have a lot of people that have relied on coaches to make the rules, make the changes in our sport. And you know, you can always tell a wrestling coach, but you can't tell them very damn much. And I say that in the kindest possible way. And I also would interject that it's true of other coaching groups as well. When the three-point line came in college basketball, less than a third of the coaches favored it. Now think of that. The most revolutionary change, the most positive change ever, less than a third of the coaches support it. That ought to be instructive to us. Coaches have to be involved in the process, but it can't be just about coaches. So anyway, we have people here with lots of different ties to wrestling. All of us have the same tie. We all love it. But think about how you can engage and think about how we might configure that sort of an organization that could really go forward and challenge some of the traditional things about the sport, like why do we have the championship this weekend? Those things are, you know, I don't know if Leroy Smith is here and Lucas from FILA is here. He's traveling from Switzerland for this championship. You know, for the first time in decades, we're finally making some progress with FILA, and I think that's a correct characterization, isn't it, Mr. Bender? That we finally changed leadership. We now are actually doing some things internationally that improve the product and improve the management. But gosh, it was hard. I mean, it took a major scandal to make it happen. And I will tell you that due to all these lawsuits, and my conference is being billed $200,000 a month for legal fees to defend ourselves against 13 class action lawsuits. We are trying to settle the cases, and right now we're hundreds of millions of dollars apart. Well, I can tell you, if we get a judgment that is in 9 figures, 10 figures, there are going to be a lot of wrestling programs going away. A lot of swimming programs, a lot of tennis programs, a lot of golf programs, a lot of track and field programs. Because when institutions, especially those that are football and basketball playing institutions, when push comes to shove, they aren't going to reduce the salary of their football coach, or reduce the salary of their basketball coach, or drop men's basketball. They're going to find other ways to continue the lifestyle in those sports, and they're going to harvest resources that are currently being spent on other things. You don't have to have a very vivid imagination to see a day when where college sport programs are 4 men's sports and 10 women's sports. You really don't. And I hate to give you that kind of negative message at a time when we're all here celebrating the very best thing about our sport. You know, you look at that Scottrade Center, and I think all of us would say the world is wonderful in the sport of wrestling. I think it looks good on TV. I think we all go back and know that there's a great competition and how difficult it is to wrestle through that tournament. We love it. It's still, I've been to them all, and it's still my favorite sporting event. And yet, we're one of only 5 championships out of 90 that the NCAA runs that actually makes money. 5 out of 90. And yet, that isn't in and of itself going to keep the number of sponsored programs at a stable state. And so, trying to add programs, trying to enhance the ones we already have, trying to make sure that we make ourselves the hardest sport on campus to discontinue, not the easiest sport. And that means being progressive. That means thinking about academics. It means thinking about student-athlete behavior. It means making yourself indispensable to your athletics program in the case of coaches and student-athletes. There's a lot of things you can do, but not if you shoot yourself in the foot. Not if you don't think about it and put your sport in position to not be the first one that gets looked at, but instead be the last one that gets looked at. And that's really my message. And I think I take a holistic approach to it with a deep love and affection for the sport. There isn't anything about wrestling that I don't love. And I won a few championships. I won more than I lost. But the value of wrestling for me is that you go out there and you do it all by yourself. You've got to show up. You've got to rely on yourself. If you don't do it, you have nobody to blame but yourself. The life lessons are extraordinary. There isn't a better leadership laboratory than being out there all by yourself and trying to figure out how to make yourself successful. And how to get over it if you don't. And so my roots are deep and my feelings are deep about it, but I don't want us to look back 10 years from now and say, damn, we should have really enjoyed it when we had 77 programs. Because that's really kind of what we're doing, looking back now, saying, gosh, the good old days, you know. And Mike Doty's comments about the Halls of Fame in Stillwater and Waterloo, you know, those are spot on. We want those places to be great, but you know what? Those Hall of Fames are not worth a nickel if they can't be used to further strengthen the sport. They have to be a tool for us to say it was great then, and with your help, it could be great going forward. And so I just think that there's a lot of work to do, and every last one of us that cares about it better have a hand on the oar, because if we don't, we're not going to like the outcome. And so let me stop there, and if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to answer a few, especially be happy to get answers if you have any of those.